You know the feeling, that moment when your tomato seedlings curl into themselves despite you doing everything right. This man had that same frustration for decades. He was known only as Seu James, a retired mechanic in upstate New York. In 2022, he stumbled onto a detail that every agronomist had missed. He didn't have a lab. He had 3 cows, a dying rose bush, and a stubborn refusal to accept that the garden had given up. What he did next was not wisdom. It was decades of trial and error compressed into a single morning. You've heard the official script: water deeply, add fertilizer, check the soil pH. Those steps work for healthy plants. But what do you do when the leaves have already turned brown and brittle? What do you do when the soil feels like concrete and the roots have stopped drinking? The conventional answer is that there's no coming back from that point. The plant is dead. Dig it out and start over. That's what every gardening manual will tell you. That's what the YouTube tutorials with perfect lighting will say. And at first glance, the science seems to agree. Here's where the crack appears. Seu James poured undiluted milk straight onto the soil around his wilting roses. Not sprayed on the leaves, not mixed with water. 3 gallons of whole milk right onto the dirt. If you follow the official script, that should have killed everything instantly. Fresh milk contains lactose, casein proteins, and living bacteria that in theory should rot the roots and attract every pest within 50 meters. But on day 4, he noticed something. The soil had changed texture. It wasn't muddy or slimy the way you'd expect. It had formed a thin crust on the surface, and underneath, it was darker than before. On day 5, the rose bush that had been a brown skeleton showed the first trace of green at the base of the stem. Remember that I told you this story begins with a contradiction. Here it is. The same substance that can destroy a plant when used wrong can trigger a survival response when applied with precision. The trick is understanding which mechanism is at work. You just uncovered the crack in the official story, that the same substance can destroy or save depending on how you apply it. That is the exact moment most gardeners turn back. Do not turn back. Subscribe so you do not miss the next kitchen scrap secret we pry open and test against the manuals. And leave a comment. What is one garden secret you discovered by accident? I want to see how many of us are already finding the fissures in the official script. Let me walk you through what happens chemically when milk hits soil. The key actors are the bacteria in the milk. Fresh milk carries live lactic acid bacteria, the same kind you find in yogurt and sourdough starter. When those bacteria land on dry, compacted soil, they begin fermenting the lactose. That fermentation process produces lactic acid, which is mild enough to break down mineral crusts without burning the roots. But the real magic is in the byproduct. As the bacteria digest the milk proteins, they release peptides and amino acids directly into the root zone. Plants don't eat solid food. They absorb dissolved nutrients through their roots. Those amino acids are bioavailable calcium transporters. In a single liter of milk, you're depositing roughly 1.2 grams of calcium that the roots can use within hours. Now, here's where the science gets specific. 2016, a study at the University of California tracked the effect of milk-based soil drenches on tomato plants that had been stressed by drought. They measured root growth, leaf chlorophyll content, and soil microbiology over a 3-week period. What they found was that the plants receiving a single milk drench rebounded with 12% more root mass than the control group within 14 days. Not because the milk fed them directly, but because it fed the soil microbes that feed the roots. This is the part most people miss. You're not watering the plant. You're feeding the soil army that supports the plant. Seu James didn't know the study existed, but he observed the same result. The soil around his milk-soaked rosebush was crawling with earthworms within a week. The untreated patch a few feet away was still dead and compacted. By the 5th day, the rose stem had turned from brown to green. Not fully healed, but the cambium layer had reactivated. That's the layer of living tissue just under the bark that transports water and nutrients. In a dehydrated plant, the cambium shuts down as a survival mechanism. The milk bacteria, combined with the moisture and the calcium, triggered a restart signal. Stop and think about your own garden for a second. Have you ever had a plant that looked gone, beyond saving, and you kept watering it out of sheer guilt? I know I have. That feeling of the wilted leaf dropping off and the stem going hollow, it's personal. It feels like failure. But here's what nobody tells you. Sometimes the roots are still alive, even when the leaves have given up. The cambium is dormant, not dead. And milk, applied correctly, can wake it up. You know the guilt watering. You know the hollow stem. That is exactly the point where most of us quit. But the soil is still holding a pulse. Subscribe to join the community of gardeners who refuse to pronounce death until the soil itself goes silent. Drop a single word in the comments. The word that describes the moment you realized your plant was still alive inside. I need to read that word. Now I have to pause and warn you about the trap, because if you do this wrong, you will destroy your garden. The #1 mistake is using undiluted milk on the leaves. Remember the casein proteins I mentioned? When milk dries on a leaf surface, those proteins form a film. That film clogs the stomata, which are the tiny pores on the leaf that allow gas exchange. Clogged stomata mean the leaf can't breathe, and it suffocates within hours. That's why Seu James poured the milk on the soil, not the foliage. The soil filters the protein away. The leaves stay clean. The second mistake is using whole milk repeatedly. Whole milk contains fats. In the soil, those fats can go rancid. If the soil is too wet and lacks oxygen, rancid fat smells like sour butter and attracts ants, flies, and rodents. The soil goes anaerobic, which means the good bacteria die and the bad bacteria take over. Instead of revival, you get a rotten mess. The correct ratio is 1 part milk to 9 parts water for foliar sprays. But for soil drenching, where you're targeting the roots, you can use a slightly stronger ratio. 1 part milk to 4 parts water, and apply it once. Not every week, once. Then you stop and let the soil biology do its work. Let me show you the step-by-step transformation that Seu James followed, because it's reproducible. First, he waited until late afternoon, when the sun was low. Direct sunlight on wet milk can cook the soil surface and kill the bacteria. He chose a day when the soil was dry but not cracked. The milk needs to soak in, not run off. Second, he mixed the milk with water at a ratio of 1 to 4. 3 gallons of milk became 15 gallons of solution. He poured it slowly around the base of the rose bush, not directly on the stem. The solution spread outward in a ring about 3 feet in diameter, covering the entire root zone. He did not stir it in. He let gravity pull it down. Third, he covered the wet soil with a thin layer of dried leaves. This is crucial. The mulch layer protects the bacteria from UV radiation, which can kill them within minutes. It also prevents the formation of that protein crust I mentioned earlier. The leaves act as a slow-release filter, allowing the milk solution to percolate evenly into the soil over several hours. On day 2, he checked the soil moisture. It was still damp, but not waterlogged. The smell had changed from the neutral scent of dry dirt to a faint, sweet, sour note. The smell of active fermentation. That's a good sign. It means the lactic acid bacteria are feeding and multiplying. On day 3, he saw the first earthworm, not on the surface, but just under it, tunneling through the softened soil. Earthworms are the soil's emergency response team. When they show up, it means the organic matter is being processed into plant-available nutrients. On day 4, the stem at the base of the rosebush had shifted from brittle brown to a flexible, pale green. He pressed his thumb against it gently and felt resistance instead of crunch. The cambium had reactivated. On day 5, at the first growth node above the soil line, a tiny bud had emerged. Not a leaf yet, just a bump of living tissue pushing through the bark. That was the proof he needed. The plant had not returned from the dead. It had been dormant, and the milk solution had supplied the exact conditions to wake it up. Now, I want you to picture your own garden. Imagine walking out tomorrow morning before the sun climbs too high and kneeling next to a plant you've already written off. You have a container of milk in your hand, not expensive fertilizer, not a synthetic chemical, something you almost threw away. You pour it slowly, watch it soak into the soil, and you know that underground, an invisible army is waking up. The reason Seu James's story spread isn't because milk is magic. It's because the solution was already in his kitchen. He didn't need a specialized product. He didn't need a degree. He just needed to know the mechanism, the ratio, and the timing. The old gardener's secret was not wisdom. It was refusing to accept the official story without testing it himself. At what point in this video did you realize you've been throwing away the one thing that could have saved your plants? Write it in the comments. I want to know how many of us were taught the same mistake. Now here's where most people quit. They try this once, don't see a green leaf within 24 hours, and go back to the synthetic bag. But the mechanism takes time. The 2016 study measured root recovery on day 14, not day 1. Patience is not passive waiting. Patience is
An hour on the
active
farm,
trust that
a
the
timeless
biology is set
ritual.
in motion
But
will
where does
complete
this
its cycle.
ancient practice
There
truly
is
begin?
one more thread I
Join
need to
us
leave
next
open.
week.
What happens when you combine this milk drench with the old coffee grounds and crushed eggshells we talked about before? The calcium from the milk teams up with the potassium from the coffee and the shell's slow-release minerals to create a soil environment that regenerates itself. I'll show you exactly how to layer those 3 inputs in next week's video. You already know the next layer is coming. The full calcium, coffee, and eggshell alignment. Do not wait until next week to test what you just learned. Subscribe now so you hold on to this thread. The same mechanism, the same stubborn refusal to accept failure, stretched across 3 common scraps. And tell me in the comments, will you pour the milk drench tonight? Or do you need to see it rescue someone else's soil first? I will be checking the thread. For now, take what you've learned. Go outside. Look at the plant you thought was finished. Kneel down. Pour the solution and come back in 7 days to tell me what changed. The secret is not magic. It's mechanism. Subscribe and come harvest with us. That's the whole experiment. 1 man, 3 gallons of milk, a patch of dead soil, and the stubborn refusal to accept that brown stems meant surrender. You don't need to be 70 years old or own a cow to replicate it. You need to understand that sometimes the gardener is not the hero. The soil is, and the milk is not a medicine. It's a delivery system for the tiny farmers underground that have been waiting for someone to bring them food. When you pour that solution, you are not healing the plant directly. You are sending a signal into the dark, wet world beneath your feet, telling the bacteria and the fungi and the earthworms that it's time to work again. That signal arrived on day 4. On day 5, the rose bush answered. Everything you need to replicate this result is already in your refrigerator right now. The timing you can control, the ratio you can measure, the failure case you can avoid. The only variable that matters is whether you are willing to try something that looks wrong on paper but works in practice. Seu James was willing. The question now is whether you are too.